Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So glad that you're here today. This is Gavin Fish, True Crime. I'm into true crime. I like to cut past fluff and sensationalism, have good, deep conversations, look at documents, listen to interviews, look at interrogations. We love to do that here on the channel. So if that's what you love, you have found the right place. Now, today we were going to have a completely different plan. We were going to do part two of listening to the audio in the Judge Kevin Mullins murder fiasco. I would call it that. But a story broke today, and Brian Bennett, who's been on the show before, alerted me to it, and he graciously agreed to come in on the show to talk about this. So if you would join me in welcoming Brian. Brian, thank you very much for being here.
Well, thank you again for the opportunity to talk with you.
Yeah, glad you're back. I love having experts on the show. It makes me feel like we're doing something worthwhile because I have no expertise in any of this. I'm just a talking head, right? So it's good to have you. Thanks for being.
Well, thank you. I'll give you my opinions for what they're worth.
Yeah, it's great. So we're going to be talking about the Mica Miller case, right? What happened today is Fitz News down there in Myrtle Beach. Let me see if I can bring it up here. Brought us a story that is titled Mica Miller Case Strangulation Allegations Surface. Can come in on this just a little bit more. But real quick, let me just read a couple paragraphs. It says recently obtained incident reports have shed new light on interactions between the Horry County Police Department and Mica Frances Miller related to her relationship with her estranged husband, South Carolina pastor J.P. Miller. John Paul is his name. That is them right there. Let's see. One incident in particular stands out as potentially significant given the recent push to pass a standalone strangulation bill in South Carolina and the alleged role that it played in a high-profile murder case in the Palmetto upstate. Specifically, a dispatch report, and they link to it, and we're going to look at it today, noted that Mica had allegedly she had been strangled and perhaps also throat punched by J.P. Miller in the weeks leading up to her death. And then we'll listen to some of this. But I mean, you are specifically, Brian, a strangulation expert, right? So, and you live in South Carolina, and South Carolina, I think, is the only state in the nation that does not have anti-strangulation laws. So,
That's
tell me your
correct.
thoughts
That's
on this.
something we're attempting to rectify. Matter of fact, we just, as the article alluded to, we just had a new bill, strangulation bill, pre-filed in our legislature. But this will be the fourth time, and our legislative sessions run 2 years in length. So we're getting into that 7 or 8 year mark of hoping that we pass this critical legislation. And to clarify too, as far as my expertise. I've been retained by prosecutors and in the courts and stuff to testify as an expert in strangulation. I am court qualified as an expert in a few different areas, but with respect to a court qualification of a strangulation expert, I haven't met that designation yet. Probably because every time those cases have gone to court, the defendants plead out. So I
Well,
haven't gone through the voir dire process, but many people refer to me as such just because of my background in the work that I do in training many different professionals in this area and making myself available.
yeah. So actually, let's just describe this a little bit, Brian. You talked about the voir dire process, right? Uh, each time an expert witness goes to testify in, say, in any type of trial, a civil trial, a criminal trial, they have to, I guess, to the satisfaction of the court, establish their bona fides when it comes to that particular thing, right? So there
Correct.
will be question and answer by whomever is questioning you, but you'll be cross-examined just to establish that you are indeed qualified to talk about that. So you're just waiting on a case where it'll actually go to trial, I guess, huh?
Yeah, the cases I've been retained on as an expert in that area just haven't gone to trial because Sometimes at the last minute, the defense wants to take a plea rather than go forward with the full trial and
Yeah,
the results that could happen as a result of that.
sure.
Um,
No, I did some looking into that. Nationwide, it's about 99.2% of the time it does not go to
mhm.
trial. It's most of the time. So if Micah Miller, let's bring her picture back up here. If Micah Miller was indeed a victim of strangulation by Pastor Miller, I mean, what does that mean? We talked a little bit about a little bit before we came on that might actually make her behaviors change if she has survived an attack like that.
Correct. So one of the many aspects of a non-fatal strangulation assault is what can happen physiologically to the brain and damage to the brain when it doesn't have its needed oxygen. It doesn't always necessitate that our victim survivors of strangulation lose unconsciousness or lose consciousness, excuse me. However, we know for sure that when the brain does go unconscious due to lack of oxygen, there is brain cell death. And in
Every
the
time?
research, I'm sorry.
Every time?
Yes, yes. So, I mean, every time your brain is unconscious due to lack of oxygen, there is some level of brain cell death.
Hmm.
Um, and now, what determines how much is a lot to do with duration of how long the brain is without its needed oxygen. The brain is a very oxygen demanding organ. The brain requires about 20% of our body's oxygen to stay operational within its norms.
Oh,
And the moment our brain detects a drop in the needed oxygen, it gets really angry and does really weird things. And again, when there's loss of consciousness due to that lack of oxygen, brain cells immediately start dying. I mean, literally within seconds, there's hundreds of thousands and millions of neurons and synapses that die within the brain. And so then that brings in this idea that you had asked me about, and that is, does this have an effect on someone's behavioral characteristics and their character? And the reality of it is yes. So um, it's not uncommon for there to be short term and long term responses, not just to the trauma that occurred, the emotional trauma, but the progressive physiological damage to the brain. So, what some people relate to themselves as victims, survivors themselves, they sometimes will tell you, I remember being very happy go lucky, very clear minded, decisive, confident. But over these days or years of these strangulation events, I find myself having ideas to hurt myself,
hmm.
uncontrollable anxieties, panic attacks, post traumatic stress. And again, we know there are short term and long term responses, and those can be manifested in different ways. But certainly, if in fact she was strangled, it can absolutely lead to destructive behaviors that would be out of her character and not normal as for her, even probably in examining herself, but certainly probably out of characteristics for her friends or family who knew her in a longer period of time. They'd be like, well, that's not like her. But we know that the research shows that there are um, psychological and emotional changes because of the strangulations.
What happens, uh, in your work as with the state police? You worked in law enforcement for a long time. When we're talking about what on YouTube we call DV because we don't want to say the word out loud, right? But when we're talking about a relationship, a domestic relationship that where there is violence in that relationship, um, if one of the partners resorts to using strangulation as whatever they turn to in their moment of anger or whatever it is that they're doing, trying to control the situation, they lose their temper, whatever leads to it. What is the likelihood that they would do that more than once? I guess that's my question.
It's very likely. Unfortunately, it often causes this cascade effect in this increase in frequency and increase in duration. Rarely would you find, at least in my experience, rarely have we found where someone was basically uh, did nothing of the sort and then immediately jumped to some, severe case of strangulation assault. It generally becomes a very progressive and sometimes a slowly progressing form of control and behavior. But generally, what I've seen and what other people have related to me that are professionals again in this area is that it's like cracking open the door, and it's like testing the waters. It's like doing it one time, seeing how far things will go, how much control, how much force is needed, uh, and when it is found to be successful, or unfortunately, in some cases, when uh, very abusive people get joy out of it, they
Mm,
continue on that path. It's almost like a fix that can't be, like a drug fix that can't be satisfied. And
wow.
it's pushed further and further and further. And this is why we say that, particularly in the realm of domestic violence strangulation, it's the number one indicator of future homicide. And we've said this on a previous podcast, but a woman who survives one strangulation, non-fatal strangulation assault, is at an 800% risk of being killed later. And I
By
think that directly
strangulation or
ties.
by other ways?
Usually by firearm. There's some varying statistics out there, but usually the fatality comes by way of a firearm. About 70 to 77% of the time, the fatality, the homicide, will occur by firearm, but the strangulation events were precursor indicators. And I think the strangulation, or the mindset of someone who uses strangulation, is one that they tend to try to justify
Hmm,
um, their actions. In other words, they can rationalize and they can think about what the outcome of a strangulation act may be. I mean, if you're putting your hands around someone's neck or a ligature and you're trying to deprive their body of oxygen, there has to be some type of knowledge that completion of that act could end in death.
sure.
And when someone utilizes that, and death could be the result, well, do they really care? Do they really care about taking someone's life? And so again, I think it sets them on this path of something that they can perhaps rationalize later. But I always tell our law enforcement professionals and our prosecutors and other people that are involved with victim services that when you deal with someone who utilizes strangulation as a form of assault, you are dealing with someone who has the mindset of a killer, who can rationalize taking someone's life and not really worrying about it or caring about it.
So one of the things that my friend Kenny, I have a friend named Kenny Clark. He's a medical examiner, and he
Mhm.
told me in one of our early conversations that the neck is the part of the human anatomy that we immediately know is the weak. Like we know intuitively that is the weakest part of me. That is the part that I need to protect the most, right?
Mhm.
So I would imagine that that would also mean that we all understand that it is the weakest part of everybody else, right? So if you're going after the neck, you understand what it is that you're doing. Is that that's what you're
Yeah,
saying?
and yeah. So, and then to back that up and to add one other point, look at nature. When you look at the predatory nature of animals, like lions and hyenas and things like that, what do they go for in their
Yeah,
prey? They go for the neck. It is built into our nature's predators to do that because of what you just said. It is a an area that is not protected very well, that has absolutely vital structures to the preservation of life. And so I think it can be a conscious thing, but it can also be kind of an innate thing to go for that area because we know that humans are vulnerable in that area. and um, and then also with the idea of just the need for oxygen. Again, if you look at nature, animals, and I would consider us a form of an animal,
Yeah, we are.
we inherently know we need oxygen. If you take any animal that needs oxygen to breathe, like a mammal or a reptile, and you hold them underwater, they will struggle to get to the surface for air. Same thing with us. We know, you and I know, and anybody else with a halfway intact intellect knows that if you hold your breath long enough and you maintain that, you will expire.
Right.
It is a necessary function of the body for life.
I,
And
I,
so,
I was talking to
yeah.
my buddy who's a scuba diver just this past Sunday, where I don't know how many years he's been doing it, 40 years. It takes training to be able to go, I can go to the bottom of a pool with my lungs completely empty and I know how much time I have and I can be
Mhm.
calm about it. Man, you can't put me 2 inches below the surface with my lungs empty. I'm going up as fast as I can. And I mean, the other thing is, I mean, we all have the instinct to hold our breath underwater too, right?
Mhm.
We don't, we don't mess
Yeah,
with
yeah,
that.
we're not breathing like fish. We're holding our breath for a very very specific reason. And to what your friend was relating to you, he's having to override consciously what his brain is telling him naturally.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
having to make a conscious decision through exercise and practice, knowing limits, to override that survival instinct in the brain. You know, we even see it in bugs. People say, "What do you mean?" Just walk through your yard and count how many grasshoppers jump out of your way and
Yeah.
get stepped on. Even grasshoppers have some type of ability to have a survival instinct that, hey, there's something coming at me. It may be dangerous. Let me move out of the way.
So in Micah's case, so Micah Miller, just I guess to recap here, and actually, Fitz News does a very good job of the recap. I can just read this real quick. Micah was found on the afternoon of Saturday, April 27th of this year, with she had been shot in the head. She was a stone's throw from the Lumber River, a scenic Blackwater River that flows into the Yadkin PD watershed. Man, I really hope that I said that correctly. Micah traveled to this remote location from Myrtle Beach earlier that day, and her body was discovered by police in a swampy area approximately 40 meters away from where spent shell casings and her belongings were recovered. And then her death was officially ruled that she had done it to herself. Now, if there is what do we call a history of DV in that family. I mean, they called 911 multiple times, and we actually have a 911 call thanks to Fitz News that we're going to listen to here. But I mean, and then you see somebody with a gunshot wound to her head floating face down in the river. I mean, is would it be a hard jump to make that hey, we might think this could be murder?
No, as a matter of fact, that's exactly where my mind would initially go. And I'll tell you why. Because obviously, until all evidence is gathered, whether it's trace evidence, testimonial based evidence, whatever it is, we're always taught in law enforcement that anytime you deal with a deceased, you always treat it as a homicide first, unless proven otherwise. The reason for that is scene preservation, evidence preservation, collection, chain of custody, so things can be tested, examined to see if, in fact, where the truth is. And so that's where immediately I would go to. And commonly, if you look at many different type of familial, intimate partner relationship homicides across the country, generally the first person that's looked at is who they were most directly involved with
Right,
as being the potential causative factor in the death. And so that it would not be unusual to go to this is a potential homicide, a potential murder that is staged to look like a suicide. I mean, that's something that I think any criminal investigator would have to consider and explore as much as they possibly can. I will say too, and I think you would find this to be true if you talk to other law enforcement officers, But when it comes to suicide or harming oneself, sorry, with a firearm, women rarely choose that method. Uh, Men have a tendency to utilize that method more when making a decision for self harm. Um, I, I can't remember exactly how it broke down, but I remember at one time it generally was when you look at rates of harming oneself by a firearm, white males were at the top, black males were the next like number down, white females, and then black African American females were at the very bottom as far as the rates when they choose to use a firearm. I mean, I have been on the scene of quite a few different scenes where someone has taken themselves out using a firearm. And anytime that has involved a female, the first comments by law enforcement officers, investigators on the scene is, "This is very unusual."
Mm. So what would be some of the things that were on the scene that would give an indication to police that, hey, the person harmed themselves here? I mean, how do they rule out homicide in cases like that?
Well, I haven't been privy to the case files or the crime scene photos or the
Sure.
autopsy reports or anything
So
like
just
that.
generally speaking,
Um,
not specific to Mica, I guess.
yeah, so one of the things we'd be looking at is a lot of times position, body position, how the person is lying down or positioned as it relates to the item that was used to take themselves out.
Mm.
Commonly, what you see in some of the movies is, well, the person is right-handed, but why were they using their left hand? Why is the firearm on their left side?
Yeah.
Sometimes there's some environmental environmental concerns with structure or environment that seem out of place, like the time of day, the location where the corpse was discovered. Again, what type of weapon of choice? In other words, could it, if this is something that they did to themselves, could they realistically manipulate that particular item in that particular way to finalize their life? This is where sometimes, and I'm not trying to get off track here, but this is where sometimes where we see a strangulation staged as a hanging. Well, when someone hangs himself or harms himself in that way, the ligature marks are generally follow a pretty specific pattern, and it relates to the weight of the body and its position when unconsciousness was lost. And it's more of like an acute angle from the bottom of the noose to the top. It's very very sharp.
Okay.
Where in strangulations, generally it's more of a on a horizontal plane. So if you see a ligature mark more on a horizontal plane, but you have the person hanging or suspended from a different angle, you're like, wait a minute,
Uh,
those angles don't match up. And so
okay.
that's just as it relates to the method or mechanism of someone harming themselves. And the same thing with a firearm or any other type of devices or instrument is, how does that fit within everything else? It truly is like a jigsaw puzzle, and there has to be very deliberate and attentive detail. Because I mean, there's been many cases that you watch on TV where seemingly it was someone who harmed themselves, took themselves out, but with the development of a new set of eyes, a new set of investigators, a new set of experts, forensic evidence, clarity came at a much much later time.
Mm.
Now, things that, in this case that I have some concerns about is the fact that, she was found in a body of water. I don't know what the condition of her body was when it was found, um, to what degree it could be realistically examined for gunshot residue on the hands,
Well, and
recovery of,
her
yeah.
body was found within the hour because
Mhm.
the 911 call that many people don't believe was her. I think it
Mhm.
was, but you know, this is where I am. Can you see where I am on your GPS? Right, this is where I am. I'm fixing to do this. So it wasn't very long before she was in a body of water.
Mhm.
Redondo Beach says, I was strangled to the point of involuntary urination. Cops believed my husband said he didn't do it.
We've talked about this on the previous
Yeah.
podcast.
Tell us a little bit more about that. Like, I mean,
Right.
police
So
officers need to be trained, right, for this sort of
correct,
stuff.
correct. So one of the signs and symptoms and indicators of a strangulation event is involuntary bowel
Yeah,
and
bodily
bowel control.
functions. Yeah.
Yeah, and essentially what happens is when the brain goes into that unconscious state, the autonomic functions of our body that are automatic that we don't have to think about become unoperational. So the muscles that control the top of our stomach, our gastric sphincter, as they call it, from our esophagus into the top of our stomach, is what keeps our stomach contents in when we're hanging upside down and at different angles.
Hmm.
It's the same thing with the muscles around our bladder and our rectum. And so it is not unusual when someone loses consciousness to have that involuntary loss of control.
Yeah, that's
But that indicates a loss of consciousness. That's one of those indicators of LOC, loss of consciousness.
so okay. I think the next thing that I want to do here, Brian, is I would really like to listen to this 911 call. Uh, this was a call that was made by Mica Frances Miller. I keep calling her Mica Miller. Her family wants her to be called by her by her maiden name, but um, just so we all understand, Mica Frances Miller. It's about a 9-minute call, and I found it kind of curious, but I'm completely untrained. And honestly, I only listened to about a minute of it because I wanted to be able to react while we were listening to it. But what I'd like to do is just have a listen. And like I told you before we came on, if there's any moment you want to pause, you just let me know. I'll pause it. We'll discuss it a little bit, okay?
Okay.
And then everybody else, if you have any questions for Brian or any comments, please just put GF on the comment, and that will get my attention. All right, so here is the audio.
911, what's the address of the emergency?
Hi,
Brian, I want to make sure you can hear that. Are
I
you able
can.
to hear? Okay, good deal.
I have somebody who I believe to be in a manic state and is a direct danger to the people in his household and himself and others. I need an immediate pickup, not the 72-hour pickup that a spouse can initiate. I need this to be a little quicker because he is a flight risk. There's been domestic violence. He put his hands on me.
Yeah, stop right
And I
there.
need an
Yeah.
immediate pickup, not a
Yep. So let's talk about what that pickup means. There's what we call a involuntary commitment that can be instituted when someone is a threat to themselves or others. Um, in some cases, and this is when the danger is acute. So if someone expresses that they want to harm themselves or others, there are mechanisms and statutory mechanisms in place where law enforcement can take a person into custody without a warrant and take them to a hospital to be psychologically examined
Okay.
by generally a clinical psychologist. And so what she's referring to is there's something I, I don't, and we'll listen to more of the call. But what she's alluding to is this guy is such a danger to himself or others. We need a pickup now. That means get here, pick him up, and take him directly to the hospital immediately. The 72-hour is more of a process that happens through the probate courts where, let's say you have a concern. It's not an immediate concern, but someone is displaying behaviors that would endanger themselves or others, or they or characteristics, maybe abuse of alcohol or drugs or that sort of thing. People can go through the court system and file a petition to have that person picked up on a commitment order that is signed by a judge. So essentially, a petition is made, the petition is examined for cause by the court, and
Okay.
if a judge deems it necessary, the judge signs an order, and that is the authority by which law enforcement will pick up and take that person into custody. But the reason it's 72 is because it's not an emergent situation. It's not an acute situation. In this case, she's indicating that there is something going on that is emergent and acute and needs immediate intervention.
Well, the thing that struck me on this is that she knew all that, which kind of tells me that she has been in this kind of situation before, either on one side or the other, right? That
Right.
I think that's an indication to me that these people have engaged with law enforcement and
Correct.
you know, involuntary committals before. Like, before you just told me that, there's no way that I would understand that. It's
Yeah, it's
not part of my life.
until people actually interact with the professionals that do this every day. These processes are generally unknown to most of the public. It's what I used to tell our law enforcement officers all the time: is, don't expect people to know the processes, the mechanisms, and the requirements that you do. You are the professional. You are the one that knows. You're the one that has to educate. And to your statement, I completely agree. She's had some dealing, some conversation about this before to know that terminology and to know those time windows that she referenced.
Yeah, it's actually kind of a sad commentary that she has that expertise, right? Most of us don't need that expertise, or many of us, I would say. All right, let's keep going. Stop me anytime.
72 hour where he can flee the county.
Okay, honey, what's the address?
Where I think he should be.
These are redactions, everybody. When the volume goes down, it's a redaction.
Water, which is one word, Cold Water Circle, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, 29588.
And who is he to you?
Can you say that one more time?
Who is he to you, honey?
He's my husband.
Okay, and he put his hands on you?
Yeah, he tried to throat punch me, but thankfully I was standing up, so he made contact, but it didn't knock the wind out of me like it should have.
That right there, Brian, also kind of feels like she knows what it feels like to be punched in the throat.
Yeah, and to your comment that you made earlier, I mean, the throat is a very sensitive area. I mean, when you look at people that teach like self-defense, especially to our women,
Mm-hmm.
Who may not have the physical strength to resist, but can get in quick, pointed strikes, the eyes and the throat and the groin are those preferred target areas. So, yeah, it's
Yeah, I mean, as we started taking our kids to martial arts when they were little, those our instructors, those were the first things that were taught, right? To
mm-hmm.
children, people who are diminutive in stature, they need those advantages.
Correct.
But it just feels like, he throat punched me, but it didn't really knock the wind out of me like it should have. Kind of indicates that she's had the wind knocked out of her in the past, I guess.
Yeah. And of course, a punch to the throat is very debilitating. It's extremely painful. I mean, I've never had it even done by accident, but I've been on scenes where that has happened, and it's extraordinarily painful and incapacitating.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going.
And he's pushed me down in front of thousands of people at Disney World, and so, yeah, and his best friend even saw that happen. He slapped drinks right out of my hand.
Okay, honey, when did he put his hands around your throat?
That was before I was in the hospital after that from just a panic attack of what was happening. That was about a week ago, but I just got out of the hospital a couple of days ago, and when I got out, he was impersonating.
Yeah.
So her saying that she had been to the hospital for a panic attack
mm-hmm.
after this hands around the neck throat really, I mean, causes me a lot of concern that she might have been at the hospital but did not get the appropriate triage. She might have gotten the care as it relates to maybe a behavioral health specialist, but how much time was actually dedicated to anything that may have actually happened internally as a result of. And I mean, let's face it, when someone is facing their own mortality face to face with the person who could take their life,
Hmm.
that could certainly cause a panic attack.
Oh, yeah.
You
Yes.
know, I nearly lost my life, or I could have lost my life. I mean, sometimes those things happen immediately, but sometimes they happen hours or weeks later.
As you start to stew on it, ruminate a little bit, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
And
and
then panic attacks are can be debilitating as well. I mean, people have tremors, they can't breathe, they will have difficulty speaking. Yeah, it's really difficult for a lot of people.
well, and I think that the hospital stay that she's talking about was an involuntary hospitalization that he probably went through the probate court to do. I think she talks a little bit more about that. Let me bring that up.
Getting my identity with the phone that he had in his hands. I didn't even have my phone or
Let me
anything, and
just
he
go back just a little bit so that we.
a couple days ago. And when I got out, he was impersonating my identity with the phone that he had in his hands. I didn't even have my phone or anything, and he's texting everybody. He hacked my social media, and he's got guns in the home and a baby staying there right now. Or at 6 o'clock tonight, his sister who lives with him is going to pick up her baby because she got her baby taken away from her because she's a danger, apparently at risk of being a danger to her baby because she's postpartum. So by 6 o'clock tonight, when they pick him up in Conway, that baby's going to be at that house where he's used guns as intimidation in the past, where he's put his hands on me, and
Stop.
he's on a.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So guns as intimidation. Yeah, again, this is not unusual. Matter of fact, because of firearms being used as an intimidating factor, uh, and with regard to South Carolina, that's why in 2015, when we reformed our domestic violence laws, our domestic violence first offense added the use of a firearm in any way automatically qualifies for a first degree domestic violence charge. And what people initially thought was, well, you've got to be pointing at somebody and threatening to, to off them. But the reality is, a lot of times it's just sitting there on the table and somebody's patting their hand on it, or
Yep.
they've got it down by their side, they are purposefully seen unlocking the gun cabinet during the argument.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so it's a people say it's too broad of a language within the statute, but the reason that it was there was because of exactly some of the things that she was saying, the intimidation factor of the firearm. And with respect to strangulation is also intimidating in itself and is actually more dangerous to the victim survivor legitimately and not just figuratively, but legitimately and literally than the display of a firearm.
So as you know, I work as a reporter for a local news agency, kind of like Fitz News there in Myrtle Beach. I work for a company called EYT Media, and one of my jobs every day is to look at the criminal complaints that come in. And police officers write very purposefully their affidavits of probable cause. Right in the state of Pennsylvania, we have strangulation laws, and what I have noticed is that there are two things that must happen in the state of Pennsylvania in order for it to be considered strangulation. Number one, their hands or a ligature needs to go around a neck, but it doesn't have to squeeze. It just has to be on or around the neck. And then the other thing is the victim must fear that they wouldn't be able to breathe. They don't have to not be able to breathe. They just have to have the fear that they may not have been able to breathe. And so I think the reason for that is because uh, perpetrators, suspects, defendants, whatever you want to call them, were just putting their hands on the victim, just putting their hand there, just to tell you at any moment, all I have to do is squeeze. And that's super intimidating, very fearful. Oh my goodness, that's the equivalent of I'll just pat this gun that is sitting next to me, or go unlock the gun cabinet.
And the other thing too is we have to understand, and I think most of your viewers understand this, that most domestic violence is never reported to law enforcement. And when it is reported to law enforcement, there's almost always been a significant history of it before that point. And so we always ask that law enforcement officers look at any domestic violence call in a historical context, not just what is known to the law enforcement officer through their own experience with these individuals or as known through the courts or other law enforcement agencies. But here's the thing, it also has to be an understanding of what has occurred in that house, which is sometimes only known between the two people that have been in that house. So when we used to teach our officers, or when I used to teach our officers, one of the things I would always say is you need to dig into and ask about what the known history is between these two parties, between themselves.
Not just what has been reported or.
Yeah, because I said, yeah, I mean, a lot of law enforcement officers will go to a call and there's no documented call history of a domestic incident. There's no incident reports of a domestic incident. But when they talk to and interview the two parties involved, they find out this has been going on for 3 years. And a lot of times the victim survivors can relate to very specific events. At least in our statute here, that has some weight. History known of the between the two parties does have some bearing on determining primary aggressor in South Carolina, because sometimes that's all you have is the history known to those two parties.
Yeah. Well, it's good to know. Like I wonder how many police officers, like before I get back in this, I read these criminal complaints, and oftentimes an officer, I live in a small town, so I know this guy. I like see him at the grocery store, and we interface at like the Christmas tree light up and stuff like that, right? And I know by reading the affidavit of probable cause that he has been there multiple times over the last couple of years. I wonder how much, what's the right term, jadedness kind of plays into what police officers will and will not do when called onto those calls. I mean, that might be something that's like my buddy who goes scuba diving. You have to train it out of you. You have to go
Correct.
into a situation seeking the truth and seeking the facts, not worrying about your personal feelings about the
Correct.
situation.
I mean, personal feelings and have to go out the door. I mean, you really have to leave that out at your patrol car. I mean, domestic violence calls are incredibly frustrating, and it's incredibly hard sometimes to get to the truth of the matter. Often, you hear the truth, but only portions of the truth.
Right.
We know that offenders will try to cover up and explain away, but we also know, and for their own good reasons, that our domestic violence victims will do the same thing. They will sometimes lie, cover up, fudge the truth, cover for the offender, and it's not because they want to; it's because oftentimes they feel that they have to.
Mm-hmm.
I've never found any domestic violence victim that purposefully and intentionally lied to me because they wanted to. They did that as a method of self-preservation, knowing that oftentimes they're going to be back in the same situation with the same person, and they're fearful of retaliation
Right.
and reprisal.
Yeah.
And
No,
so officers do get jaded, and unfortunately, some of them get a very bad attitude. Like, oh, this is the third time I've been to this house this week. Can't you two people behave like adults?
yeah.
That attitude has to be left outside. You may voice that in your car to your private self, but get it out of your system, because when you go in there, you have to treat these calls with a level of consistency and openness and professionalism without being overly critical of people's decisions, which sometimes rest in their self-preservation.
Yeah, I had a situation here locally where I interviewed a person who, for my job, who was the alibi for a man that was accused of heinous crimes against somebody else. And she swore up and down that he was with her during the time that it was happening, right? But he went to jail for another reason. And as soon as that happened, that story changed real fast. And I was grateful for it too. It's like, yeah, I was afraid that he'd that he'd do something to me or my daughter. It was kind of one of those situations. Sometimes they're not protecting themselves. Sometimes they're protecting their children or people that they love. It's scary.
That's correct. A
All
lot
right.
of domestic uh, uh, victim survivors will do things for the benefit again of their children that they wouldn't do for themselves. For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Antipsychotic medicine that he's misusing. And I even got off the phone with the pharmacy. He didn't pick up his latest prescription, which he should have on January 3rd. And I believe at this point, based on the people that he's come in contact with, some of them reported to me that based on how he was talking, they feared he had killed and buried me somewhere. And I feel like I need an immediate pickup because he is a flight risk, because his son, the same thing just happened to his oldest son, and he fled to Georgetown.
Oh.
Yeah, so we can stop right there. Those indications of some homicidal conversations with other parties. Now, of course, I don't know who those parties are. She doesn't disclose that. However, if those conversations were true, um, I think that paints a very ominous picture of a mindset, and I think that's probably obvious to everybody. I just wanted to voice it out loud. That's
Well, and then the
extraordinarily.
second part of that was that she's claiming, and if that claim is true, that his oldest son was in the same situation she's describing as being abusive, and in order to get away, he probably went out of state or out of county or something like that. So it's almost like the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right?
Right.
If you watch your parent, your father, for example, abuse your mother as a young man, you're very impressionable, and generationally that can go on and on and on.
Yeah, I've always, again, as it relates to just training people, is that when someone makes comments to harm themselves or harm other people, I take it very, very seriously, and this is why. Some people say, well, they said this, but then they laughed it off like, I'm just joking. Here's the problem. In order for that statement to come out of your mouth, you had to visualize or play some scenario in your head for that to come out. It's not. It didn't just come out without some cognitive process taking place in your brain. And
Right.
so that's why we always used to tell our professionals, if someone says, and this is why in many cases, if a law enforcement officer goes to a scene and someone says, I'm going to harm myself, and then they go, well, no, I was just joking, they get taken to the hospital regardless.
Yeah.
You've said it, you've thought about it, you may never execute that idea, but your mouth has now given away what has been resting in the recesses of your mind, and we
Right.
have to take it seriously.
Yeah. Hand of Ike says police should take every DV call with the utmost seriousness. They have no idea the amount of courage that call took to make, and you are potentially putting that person off ever reaching out again. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think that's fair. Yeah, good
Absolutely.
comment. Let's go back over here. I've got so many buttons going on. We'll continue.
Okay. What's your first and last name?
This is actually a long redaction. We know who it is, but it's a long redaction. I promise the video is still going.
This is her dad, and she's having to use my phone because he took her phone.
That's actually one of the things about coercive control that they were talking about is that she had her means of communication taken away, or she had alleged that he took away her phone multiple times.
He has possession of her car, her purse, all her valuables.
Guns that were bought in my name that I fear he's going to use and then say it was in my name. He's got my CWP license, he's got my public notary license, and my seal and my stamp, which he's been trying to force me to sign a post-nup for the last year and a half, and I fear that he's going to use my seal to impersonate my signature like he's been impersonating my identity for the past 3 days, to sign that post-nup saying that I get nothing if we divorce. And that's not even my biggest concern. It's the identity theft. I don't care about not getting anything from the divorce. I really don't care. But that was given to me by the Secretary of State, trusting me to keep it safe. And then when I got in the hospital, they gave all my belongings to my husband, and we're here now.
Are you at that house? Are you at Coldwater?
No, we've parked in a open parking lot in Market Common by the soccer field.
So a lot of the things that she's alleging here have been alleged in what her lawyer released, talking about Mica's law. And Mooney asked this question: do you think that South Carolina will pass Mica's law?
Oh, that's a tough one. And the reason I say that is because on average it takes 6 to 8 years for a bill in our South Carolina legislature to become law. Also understand that hundreds of bills are pre-filed, and which one of those happens to rise to the top for serious consideration is very, very small.
Mm.
I mean, just with our strangulation legislation that we've been going on 7 or 8 years, that's a perfect example. Anybody that goes through the training and the education, even in this platform, to know how dangerous it is, would say, "Well, golly, why hasn't it happened sooner?" And that's what a lot of people say: is this makes sense? This is a problem. Let's get it fixed. Um, I hate to say this, but I think in this legislative session it probably will not. There's already tons of bills that are starting to stack up, and as confident as I am that at least with the strangulation legislation we've got the strongest support we have ever had, I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll even get to the point of passage of a law.
Mm.
But with that being said, the powers that be up there really determine what gets the fast track up. To give you a contrasting example, is we had a sextortion bill that was written in 2022, and essentially what that is, for those that aren't familiar, um, somebody gets a text message or an email message asking for compromising pictures. Sends compromising pictures. They ask for some back, and the person who sends these embarrassing, compromising pictures back then gets a response: "Oh, you sent these to an underage person. You need to pay me money, or I'm going to go to the
Oh,
authorities and get you
wow.
thrown in jail." And this has happened. This has become an issue in the military. This has become an issue to the degree that we had to we did pass a sextortion bill into law, but it was filed and passed into law in 1 year's time.
So that's the exception that almost proves the rule, right? It takes
Mm.
4 or 5 legislative sessions. So I think in the case of Mica's law, we just can't get down on ourselves for not getting it passed now. Just have to
Correct.
keep pushing. The best example of that in my life are Josh and Sandy Greenberg. Almost 14 years they've been pushing for justice for their daughter, where the city of Philadelphia says that she ended her own life by stabbing herself 10 times in the back of her head, right? It's
Right.
ridiculous. So it's really easy to get discouraged, but we've just gotta keep going. Thanks, Mooney, for that question. Appreciate that. Okay, let's get back to this. Is the longest 9 minute and 35-second audio we've you and
Okay,
I
they
have
are going
lots
to
to
want to
say.
meet with you. Can you get anywhere close to Coldwater?
Absolutely. I can be in Azalea Lakes, the apartment complex right across from it.
Okay. Can you head that way?
Sounds like the dispatcher is taking it seriously.
Yeah, as they should. I mean, it's
And another reason I feel like it's so urgent is because he's very hyperactive right now. He's causing a lot of damage very quickly. And his son is a felon who's been living in my house after I left. His sister, it got her baby taken away from her because she's postpartum. His father is a registered sex offender because of what he's done. So the whole family, I'm very scared for what they'll do to my family, the church. He's a pastor.
Okay.
and especially me and my life.
What's his name, honey?
His name
John Paul J.P. Miller.
What's his date of birth?
is
And what? How old is he?
he is 44 and a half.
Okay.
He's 6'2", male, brown hair, brown eyes.
And the
His
dispatchers
son
are
is
doing
like,
exactly what they're supposed to do. They're trying to get location of not just him but her, good descriptions of both parties. Where the dispatchers are trying to operate and give the officers as much information as they possibly can. Um, the fact of the matter is, we generally will not have all information, but the more information that the officers have, the more that they can proactively prepare. And that's not just on the arrival to the scene and the division of parties, but the officers can also start to formulate their investigative processes, their investigative questions, locations of potential evidence. And a lot of this can come from the initial 911 call. Um, Things that maybe the general public may say, well, that doesn't really tell me a whole lot. Well, that may be true, but it gets the officer thinking in a more proactive way than being reactive when they get to the scene and chaos ensues.
Yeah, good
identical to him, but
insight.
he's like 5'2". So please don't arrest the wrong person. But he's
Is there any
6'2".
children at that house, honey?
They should be at school right now, and he works remotely because he's a pastor. So he's either at my house or he fled to his son's house in Conway. But either way, we need to find him because his son has guns. His son is a felon.
In South Carolina, you shouldn't be having firearms if you
What kind of car were you being at Azalea Lake?
if you are a felon, right?
Well, federal law that you have a prohibition, and certainly there can be many state laws that back up federal law. That's a we talk about gun violence in the United States a lot, and predominantly a lot of our gun violence is through the possession of firearms by people who are already
Yeah, they're prohibited
prohibited from
already.
having
Yeah.
them. you know, and it would be a discussion for a different day on how they obtain those things, but obviously it's passed from person to person, not doing a purchase at a store. They're
Right.
heirlooms, they're passed on. So yeah, that's obviously a very problematic issue. And I think these indications that she keeps making about the firearms, she obviously is very concerned about the use of firearms. Uh, Obviously against her, perhaps against himself, but she's also throwing a clue out there to law enforcement: be careful of yourselves,
Yeah.
because if a person is willing to harm themselves, they're willing to harm anybody. A suicidal person is potentially homicidal, and so that's what I would take as an officer is there's a danger to me just showing up. So, and this sometimes doesn't make a whole lot of sense to people. We're supposed to, law enforcement officers, put the public's well-being first in many cases, but in some cases they don't. The idea being that if an officer cannot protect themselves, then they are not available to protect others. So the officer
Right.
has to first think about myself, my preservation on the scene. Am I going to be incapacitated? And once my safety is secured, then I can provide the safety and protection to others. So that's what I was taking as an officer is, okay, there's guns on the scene. I have to be worried about ambush because unfortunately a lot of our officers who are feloniously killed by firearms are from ambushes. And we've had quite a few law enforcement officers in South Carolina who have been killed in the line of duty, ambushed on domestic violence calls.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Wow.
Some of these officers who I knew personally.
Wow. Ambushed on purpose. They're calling it in. Or well, I mean, is the victim calling it in, or is it the person who is perpetrating it calling it in for the purpose of the ambush?
It has varied. It's
Yeah,
very,
the answer
yeah.
is yes, right? All of the
Yeah,
above.
all
Wow.
the above. Absolutely, absolutely.
Wow. Here we go.
Blue Ford Expedition.
And I can be in the first turn. So when you first come into Cascades and Azalea Lakes entrance, the very first turn, there's like a dirt patch before you get to the neighborhood where it's like a cul-de-sac dirt patch, and it's before you even enter the Cascades neighborhood. It's very obvious on the right.
Okay.
You can stop right. You can stop right there, Gavin.
Yeah.
So going back to this preservation of the officer and the people on the scene, what the dispatcher's doing is they are directing her to a location that is not the residence, so that the officers can meet with her in a safer location and gather intelligence and more information that may not have been gleaned on the initial call.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. All right.
That way we don't even have to technically enter the neighborhood. We can be right on the outskirts.
Okay, honey. And it's 246 Coldwater Circle, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
It sounds like a
I hit that.
pretty busy
And then take a
dispatch
right.
center.
Right. It'll be up on the left.
Yeah, it'll be up on the left, and you'll see the dirt patch where I talked about. Where there's when you first get in the neighborhood, immediately on the right there is a dirt patch.
I can hear the dispatcher
And his
typing.
son, who's a felon,
Yeah.
was following me around town in his coastal painting, his business he owns. His truck is decked out. He even rolled the window down because I rolled the window down, and he was following me.
Okay.
And his son, like I said, has had 3 domestic violence arrests in the last 3 months.
Wow. Man, talk about intimidation. I would be afraid for my life. The fact that she's speaking so calmly actually is, I don't know, it's surprising, it's impressive that she's able to articulate this so well.
Yeah, and some people may say may have a problem with that, but I don't. And the reason I say that is because when people are subject to to levels of control, being a prisoner in their own home, having everything controlled, certainly in the initial phases of that type of relationship, there can be a lot of anxiety, can be a lot of fear, but the human psyche is one that there's survivability thought processes. I don't know if I'm really saying that right, but I've seen many domestic violence men and women who are absolutely calm, very matter of fact, when there's been an extensive history of, it's almost like being desensitized because they've been exposed to the trauma and the fear for so long. They come to not they don't they know it's wrong, but they come to accept it in their psyche, and they become much more calm and very matter of fact. Which some people may say, well, my goodness, if that was happening to me, I'd be going crazy. I'd be going out of my mind. I'd be in a panic. And again, in the initial phases and in the initial exposure to these stimulus, that may be, but the constant exposure to it causes the psyche to desensitize. And that's like and again, I like to do comparative analysis. The first time a police officer's in a high speed car chase,
Mm-hmm. Oh,
it
I
almost
bet the
sounds like
adrenaline.
it sounds like they're screaming on the radio. I've been there. I was that new officer.
Wow.
But as you get exposed to that stimulus and dealing with that level of stress and anxiety, a sense of calm. It's not that you disregard the danger and the dangers don't exist and you block it out of your mind. It's just that the stress mechanisms in your body can deal with it in a better way. And
Now,
that's the feeling that I get with this, is that she is so direct and very matter of fact and clear minded that that's where she is right now.
That what was going through my mind when you were saying that is my grandfather. We just had you know, the anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge. So I've been thinking about my grandfather a lot lately. He was he he was one of those that was in the Battle of the Bulge, and talking about like old war stories. By the time he'd been in Europe for a couple of months as a tank driver, he took the hatch off of above where he sat as a driver, because he's like, well, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die anyway. So who cares? So why would I put the hatch down and get down under protection? I'll just drive. Right. So
Mm.
I'm sure those first couple of months, he was like that high speed chase officer, right? About the adrenaline was pumping everything. But even in war where people are dying around you, it just becomes well, that's what's happening today. It's what
And
happened
this is where
yesterday.
someone who's not trained may have a tendency to discredit her, like, well, she's not behaving like a victim. She's not behaving as if she's really in fear because she wouldn't be talking like this when the opposite can actually be true.
Yeah, she may have, like, all of these are allegations, and
Correct.
unfortunately, how are we ever going to prove them now that she is no longer on this earth with us? But if her allegations are true, then she had been abused in many ways over the course of a long period of time. She probably was desensitized to it, and actually, I'm glad that you said that, because that was one of the things when I first started listening to this. Like, wow, she is speaking just very matter of factly,
Mhm.
and I think you've probably hit the nail right on the head as to why. All right, just got a couple more minutes here.
His ex-wife currently has
A
had
minute.
his children taken away, and they're getting a divorce. The sister is going through a divorce. She lives in the home. She's postpartum and very dangerous to her baby. That's why she can't have her baby.
She is repeating these same things multiple times too.
Mhm. And what you hear in the background, you hear a little bit of typing. That's essentially the dispatcher keying in to the call, what we call the call card or the call record, what she is saying. I mean, certainly it's recorded, but there's also a type. It's not a word for word transcript, but essentially it's sets a timeline and bursts or blurbs of information that goes into the typed record. And then, more than likely, and I don't know this specific dispatch center, but with technology and the way the dispatchers operate now, more than likely, these notes that the dispatcher is typing out are going to the data terminals that are in the patrol cars,
Yeah.
so that they can be updated on the way as well with these indications and statements.
And we'll take a look at one of these records that's been released thanks to Fitz News. It's probably not exactly what it is that you're talking about, but it does look to me like it's just typed out very quickly, and sometimes
Mhm.
it's not in code, but it's abbreviated, right?
Correct.
They use terms that they're able to just read like words. The rest of us have to kind of figure it out.
Okay, I have that caller and an officer be dispatched as soon as possible, okay?
Okay, thanks. We'll be waiting. We're here.
And it's the Azalea Lake. Okay, alrighty. They'll be there as soon as possible. Anything changes, call us back, okay?
Okay, thanks so much.
And that is pretty much that. Well, that is the end of it. Let me just real quick, since you brought it up, Brian. This is the incident report that Fitz News was able to get. They shared it on the website, and if we scroll down, I mean, first off, they do say this is emergent. It's a
Mhm.
domestic disturbance / violence, right there. They're definitely putting this out there. And then I noticed that dispatch suffix C, strangled or choked, right? So
Mhm.
that's something that the officer would be able to see very quickly. Someone was
Absolutely, yeah.
strangled or choked. Caller advised that he choked her.
Mhm.
So yeah, that is part of the record. Thank you very much to Fitz News. That's them right there. Check them out. I don't know, Brian, we've been going a little, well, almost an hour and 10 minutes. Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap it up here? Let me ask you this. Let me give you a leading question. After having heard that conversation and being in South Carolina, knowing the Mica Miller case as a member of the public, I know that you don't have any insider information, but knowing the Mica Miller case, does this change your mind, or does this influence you or your thinking as to what possibly happened to Mica Miller?
Uh, in full disclosure, I still can't draw a conclusion. And the reason I say that is when there's been like other national cases or cases in South Carolina, and people would see me in uniform and know, they'd say, "Well, what's your opinion?" And I say, "I can't formulate one unless I have all the information." And because I haven't been privy to the major aspects of the investigation other than what was released to the media, I'm simply at a point right now that I do not know. I know a lot of people are frustrated with how slow this seems to be moving. I don't want people to get discouraged. I want them to understand there is very significant reasons why investigations sometimes need to move slow. There are very significant reasons why much of the information cannot be disclosed lest it compromise active investigative work and investigative techniques. Um, I'm still waiting, for some information myself to make a determination in my own mind what exactly occurred here at the end. But I will say this, and we talked about this just before we came on. The moment that this case made the media and she was missing, and I say this about all cases where there's a domestic history and the female goes missing, I think each one of those cases, that female needs to be listed as endangered, not just missing. Because the cases that I'm familiar with, that unfortunately have led to homicides, that's unusual. When you have a domestic relation and one of the parties just up and disappears, is
Mm-hmm.
unaccountable, especially to the people that know them and relate with them best on a regular basis. To me, that is a huge warning sign. And I told a number of people I would not be surprised if strangulation in some way is not indicated in this particular case. And as we see now, there is some indications that things like that did occur. And the reason I say that is because that's what data and research tell us about many of these cases. And again, ultimately, was her life taken at the hands of another or by herself? Man, I really don't know. I really wish
Yeah.
I could take a look at the forensic evidence and a lot of the other stuff, but uh, it's a tough one for sure.
Yeah. In the beginning of this, just my closing thoughts here, I guess, uh, I thought that it was kind of suspicious, right? It was really suspicious. It was very quick how the sheriff's office immediately came out and said she had done it to herself. And I saw the news reports, the family going out there. Well, how did she get 40 meters away from where the shell casings were? And I had those kinds of questions. But ultimately, I kind of came to, I don't know that there's anything that I could point to where the police would have a reason to tell us something other than the truth. Like it might be there, but I can't think of it. So I have come to just accept that Mica Miller probably did it to herself. However, I think that J.P. Miller, where's his picture here? This is his lovely mugshot from a couple weeks ago. I think that if the allegations are true that Mica's family, Mica herself, we just listened to Mica herself raising serious allegations, her diaries, her lawyer, then I think that there is some responsibility that Mr. Or Pastor J.P. Miller probably holds, and I hope that strangulation law or the strangulation bill becomes law there in South Carolina, and I'm hopeful that Mica's law will do the same thing. And if it does, I think that's only 4 or 5 states that has a coercive control law. And I hope that more states will adopt them, because it just, I mean, this was a woman that was going through a lot of turmoil in her life. And what
Yeah.
it either drove her to end her life in a violent way, or somebody ended her life that violent way. It's hard to say, but
Yeah.
that relationship certainly was the highway that drove her in that direction, I guess. Yeah. Brian, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. This is your
Again,
second
you're very
time
welcome.
on.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity, again, to talk about some really, um, issues related to this case, but they're also pervasive in a lot of other aspects of society and relationships. The strangulation dangers and issues seem to raise its head quite frequently. Once the level of awareness is raised, we see recognizable patterns of frequency that we did not see previously.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. Hope you'll come back. Real quick, hang out here just 1 second, Brian. Guys, we are going to be, I need to turn this off. Just, we're going to be returning back to the Judge Mullins case tomorrow, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. If you haven't subscribed and you think that you like this kind of content, that I've earned it, please go ahead and subscribe. Come back tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Remember that I've now pushed those parts out to at least December 23rd. That will be the last day that I will be live streaming this year, because we're doing a family vacation, heading back to the homestead to visit grandparents and uncles and aunts and all of our cousins and so forth. So, yeah, that I just wanted to give you a heads up for that. If you are new here, real quick, you can always find case documents and where am I trying to go? Give me just 1 second. Yeah, you can find case documents on my website, gavinfish.com. If you click on Crime Cod, that will take you over to my full-fledged true crime website, but you can sign up for the newsletter there. Also, head on over to the Fish Tank on Facebook to hang out with some like-minded folks if you like Facebook. By the way, you can follow Brian on Facebook. Just search Strangulation Law for SC. That is his pet project, something that he obviously is very committed to. And you can join this group, Strangulation Law for SC. With that, I will bid you adieu, and I will see you the next time, which is hopefully tomorrow at 7:30. All right, take care. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below.